Hello, welcome back to L3 Philosophy with Emmy. This is the show where we give you the tools, the stories, and the expert advice to L3. Love yourself, love your relationships, and love your life. And today I am so happy to have my guest, Jeannine Rashidi. I'm going to read you all the things she specializes in because she is bringing a wealth of knowledge today. So she is a doctor of Ayurveda, international keynote and motivational speaker. She's a #1 best-selling author. She's overcome profound personal adversities such as sexual, physical, mental, and emotional abuse, as well as teenage motherhood. She transformed her life by identifying and breaking repeating patterns. She has embarked on a deep, immersive healing journey that led her to become a specialist in PTSD and trauma. And as the founder of Goodbye Tension, she has dedicated over 2 decades to helping others navigate physical, mental, and emotional tension. Her best-selling book, Abundance Beyond Trauma, introduces the EDHIR process, which is a technique she developed for mentally and emotionally digesting traumatic experiences. Now, a proud grandmother of 5, Jeannine's mission extends to generational healing, embodying her belief that healed people heal people. Jeannine, welcome.
Thank you, Emmy. It's an honor to be here.
All right. So I thought we could start off by helping everyone understand, including myself, what is trauma? Because we hear this word a lot, especially on social media, and I feel like everyone these days is talking about like, oh, my trauma, my trauma. And so is there a difference between like I've also heard the term like little t trauma, big T trauma? Like how should we define trauma?
That's a really great question. First, I would say don't compare your trauma, whether you call it a big T or little t. I don't actually like that verbiage to anyone else because trauma is anything that is more than your mind body system can handle, to the point at which you either disassociate or disconnect from yourself during that event that was too much to handle. Now, that's a self-preservation mechanism within our psyche that, protects us when we have an experience like that. What we're not hearing a lot about is what do we do after that to reclaim those parts of ourselves that we disconnected from or disassociated from as a result of that trauma. So I don't really believe in the big T, little t, because at that point we are saying that your trauma is bigger or littler than someone else's. And especially from an Eastern perspective, Eastern medicine perspective, and my own personal experience, it is not something that can be compared. It is unique to each individual. I've had many cases, let's use rape, for example. You could have two people that experience very similar cases of rape, and one may be affected for a longer period of time versus the other because it's very much dependent on what was the foundation of the psyche before the experience happened, during the experience, and what was the support after the experience. So, just the main thing I want to emphasize is please don't compare. It is very unique to you. And if it was more than you could handle, then yes, it was traumatic.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate you explaining that clearly, and also that we started this way because it's very validating to know that what we've been through, and I'm speaking for myself, and because I think as humans we naturally have a tendency to always compare and then always self-judge. It's like, well, I know someone who went through much worse than I did, and that's perspective speaking right there.
Right.
So what right do I have to feel still, really bad about this, or just to not have been able to let it go yet? Or, there's a lot of self-critiquing and judgment, I think, that comes in. I know on my part, I've done it a lot because I haven't had anything, relatively bad happen to me, but my experiences of pain and suffering were very, very real to me, even though it wasn't, what maybe people would consider like anything bad happening. So I think
Right.
it's really validating that you're helping us understand that it's our own personal experience and how we end up coping with it and the support that we get around it that's really going to kind of see how we're going to be dealing with it. So I'm curious to know a little bit more about the piece you said around dissociation. So
Mhm.
you said if we're going through something that where our mind just can't handle in the moment. When you say dissociation, are you talking about like our conscious mind kind of disconnecting from the experience itself, disconnecting from our bodies? What's happening with the subconscious mind during all that? Like how is this dissociation happening and what does that really mean?
The best way to describe it is now, granted, I come from a PTSD background of my own personal experiences as well as helping others. So when we disassociate or we disconnect, that means during the moment of the traumatic experience, a part of us says, hey, it's too much. I can't handle it. I'm going to check out. Now, some people may call that leaving your body. Other people go into maybe more of a fantasy in their head to, disassociate from the current trauma that's happening as it's happening. It's essentially this disconnect that happens where I don't know if I would call it necessarily your conscious mind because consciousness is always there. However, once we disassociate, my experience, especially using the EDHIR process, is that we now have to dive deeper into the subconscious to find that aspect that essentially, it's not like running away, but I guess in many ways you could call it that. It's a way of an escape. So if you can't physically escape a trauma, the one thing that you can do is the power of the mind is incredible. So I think the power to disassociate or disconnect is quite valid. I know that it saved me in many cases. Um, but what we need to do now is go back into the subconscious and find those aspects that we disconnected from to bring them back to our home base, which is establishing again that amazing relationship with ourselves. And that's usually what, becomes dysfunctional as a result of our trauma because we are feeling separate. And
Mm.
parts of us are reliving the trauma trigger time loop experience. So, for somebody who has post-traumatic stress disorder, whether officially diagnosed or not, something may trigger, and it's usually through our senses. A sense gets triggered that reminds us of the traumatic event. And then all of a sudden, we're taken through this time warp as if we're reliving it in the present. Now, even though logically we may know we're not reliving it in the present, other aspects of us are. And you know that you're in this state when you look at your reactions to things. You either aren't able to hear, or you're overreactive, or you're numb. Everyone experiences it differently. For me, I had lots of reaction. And it didn't make sense to me. Why was that such an overt reaction? Well, I was in a triggered state. So in my psyche, I was reliving something that was activated, by my senses that, reminded me of that trauma. And that's where the gift, it's actually a gift because it's a part of us that's saying, hey, I really need your attention. Please pay attention to me because I need to come back home and I'm trying to figure out a way, but I don't know how to find my way. And so it's a part of us that's really communicating, look at me, I need to be healed. And that's what I refer to as the unfolding of joy, because if we are courageous enough to dive in and find those aspects, even in the middle of a trigger, and that's usually the best way to do it is when you're triggered, on the other side of that trigger is where the joy is because you've discovered that part of yourself that's been disconnected, reliving that trauma trigger time loop for so long.
Mm. All right, there's a lot of different things for me to dive into there. It's so fascinating. I would love to use kind of a real life example that at least people that I work with experience all the time. I'm a breakup and relationship coach, so and also my own experience from ended relationships or tumultuous relationships. You always, hear, oh, this thing triggered me. So when you're talking about, it's usually based in your senses. You think about, okay, you hear a song on the radio, and that immediately triggers a memory or even a response from your body of when you were with that person. Going to a certain place or even seeing certain people, maybe that you associated with that person. Um, all of these things you're saying are bringing us back in some aspect of either our body or our mental state, or bring us back into a painful situation, right? Is
Yeah.
kind of what you're saying. And
Yeah.
so I would love then to for you to explain how we do come home to ourselves in those moments of when we are getting a message like, hey, listen to me, we're ringing the alarm here. How can we not just try to push it aside and be like, get through it and wonder what's wrong with us or I'm broken? Like, how do we make our identify what it is, first of all, that we need to uncover and then make our way home, as you so put it?
I created what's called the I'm Triggered Pocket Guide. And the reason I created this was because through my entire journey of healing, the one thing I wish I had was key steps when I was in that state. So when we're in that state, the first thing we have to do is be able to recognize that we're even in that state. So if you're not able to hear around you clearly what's going on, or you're feeling like you've got that tunnel vision, or you have that feeling of you're crawling out of your skin, you just got to get away, but there's no real danger in front of you. There's perceived danger. The body's saying, oh my God, I'm having a visceral experience. I'm remembering when I felt fill in the blank. The first thing and the first step to remember is wherever the breath goes, the mind will follow. So the biggest tool that you will have, and it is also the first thing that you will forget, is your breath. So step one, stop. Don't make any decisions, because if you make any decisions from a triggered place, you may very well change the entire direction of your life, because in that moment, you are not present. There's a part of you that is reliving a past configuration of quote unquote trauma. And if you make any life changes in that moment in time, it's based on that configuration, which is not present, it's past. So step one, stop, don't make any decisions, and then catch your breath. So when we're triggered, if the worst thing that you could tell somebody is take a deep breath, they're already probably hyperventilating or holding their breath. So to try to take a deep breath could actually trigger somebody more. It's also quite difficult to take a deep breath when you are in a triggered state. So what I say is try to catch your breath. So what worked for me and what has worked for, my clients is two quick inhales and a long exhale. And you keep doing that. You try to create a longer exhale until you notice that you're calming down a bit. The second step is to keep your eyes moving, especially if you might be, when it comes to fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses. The freeze response means you're stuck. And so when you keep the eyes moving, that helps keep the brain, active, but also it allows you to become more present. So when you're looking around, try to find three objects that represent consciousness. It could be like looking at your background. We've got the sunlight, we've got a plant, and maybe that's a cup of water. All three of those have life to them. Life is present. So keep your eyes moving. And then the third step, who are your well-wishers or the people you trust in your worst moments? So when you are in that triggered state and you're not feeling safe, who do you trust? And then identifying those well-wishers or safe people usually will help, again, calm down the trigger. And throughout each of these steps, you want to keep working with catching your breath. Usually by that third step, when you start remembering, okay, wait, I have support, I have friends, who could I call right now and say, hey, I'm having a moment. Could you, hold space for me? Could you help me breathe? Things like that. But usually by the third step, the breath has calmed down enough to where you might actually be able to take that deep inhale and deep exhale. And you really want to just focus on your breath until you come back to a place of presence. And then the rest of the pocket guide is using the EDHIR process to find the deeper message as what was that trigger really trying to communicate with you, and would you like the opportunity to heal it?
That is wonderful to be able to have three steps. I mean, okay, this is what I can do right now. then I can do this, then can do this. I think most people can kind of remember, three things,
Yeah.
which I'm sure you did that intentionally.
Yeah.
But I'm even thinking of times, when I've been triggered, and I'm so happy that you kind of explained what that looks and feels like because I have had that kind of tunnel vision thinking, or not even vision, but just like almost like nothing else is around me or exists anymore. And I always thought that was just so weird, but apparently it's
Yeah.
reaction that happens often when you're in that state. So that was very helpful to identify first off. And then the breathing technique is great too, because I also used to get very annoyed when people would tell me to take deep
Right.
breaths and that is the answer to all of my problems. I'm like, are you kidding me?
Right.
And I just didn't want to. Like I felt like I was in this state where even doing that is like too hard, right?
Yeah.
Or if I'm too depressed, even breathing feels like too much energy, like taking a deep breath, right?
Yeah.
So these three steps are really helpful. I would love for you to now, if you would like to lead us into the steps of, and I'm assuming it's an acronym, or
Yeah.
is it an acronym?
Mhm.
Okay. So if you want to kind of tell us what each of those letters stand for and what that process looks like, that'd be wonderful.
So the 5 steps are explore, discover, heal, integrate, and relate. So whether we call it EDHIR or the adhere process, if you look at the definition in the dictionary to adhere to something, one is that you're stuck or you're fixated on something, you're adhering to it. The other is to honor and to observe truthfully what you're witnessing. And when I uh, came up with the name, I shouldn't say I came up with it. I woke up at 3 a.m. and actually saw the acronym.
Oh.
And so, from my perspective, that came in through, higher consciousness.
Mhm.
And so when I looked it up, when you look up the definition of the English word adhere, the way they pronounce it is EDHIR. So I was like, okay, confirmation. Now, what
Wow.
does it mean?
Okay.
And so the first step, explore. Your trigger is already part of the exploration. What is happening? What are you seeing? What are you feeling? What are you tasting? What of the senses has been activated? And in my Abundance Beyond Trauma workbook, I have the I'm Triggered worksheet that can help you break that down because if you try to just do it in your head, there's already a lot going on in there. So you need to get it down on paper usually or through video. I do a lot of vlogging where if I'm in a triggered state, I immediately open up my phone and I just start speaking because I know that once I'm out of that state, I'm going to go back and I'm going to see that version of myself and see, okay, what's going on with her.
Mhm.
So the first step is explore all of the symptoms that are showing up. Maybe you're not able to hear somebody. Maybe you're feeling like you want to run away, you want to fight, whatever it is. That's the step one is to explore. Then the second step is to discover. There's a part of you that is communicating through all of these responses. This is a part of you. So if you can remember in the beginning of your trauma, you disassociated and you disconnected. So you've got the you that's experiencing it. Then you've got the part of the aspect of you that's communicating through a trigger. What we're trying to do is help this part of you see this part of you, the triggered part. And so, how do we do that? We have to get big. We have to get so big that we can see a 360-degree view of what's happening. And so I use that terminology, get big, as if you can, see from the sky view. This getting big also helps raise your consciousness, whether we call it higher self, higher mind, whatever verbiage resonates for you, there's no right or wrong here. Just can you elevate your vision enough to see from a different perspective? Because there's an aspect of us that is not affected by any of this, even though in the present triggered state, that may seem really far-fetched. But if you can remember, it's only a part of you that's speaking. It's not all of you. So I want to repeat that. It's not all of you.
Mm.
So as you get big, now you can see and you discover, oh, look at that part of me that's having this experience. And then as either whether you're looking at it through the I'm Triggered Pocket Guide or we're working together online or in office, what I have the client do is look at that version of themselves in the eyes from that higher perspective. So you maintain that higher consciousness, but now you're really observing what do you see when you observe that part of you? And then each, response is different. A lot of people see fear or sadness, whatever it is, that's what we are discovering what needs to be healed. And so when you're able to see that part of yourself, you can see, oh, wow, she's really afraid right now. She believes that fill in the blank is going to happen again, right? And yet the higher part of you, the higher mind knows that that's not what's currently happening, but is aware that this aspect believes it to be true. That's the aspect that is saying, hey, I'm looking to come back home. I feel really lost. Can you help me? And so once you discover what healing is needed, and there are some common things that we all need. We need to feel seen, heard, to feel safe, to feel accepted, and to feel loved. So even if you don't know all of what's going on and you don't have to, those are the five things that you're going to give that aspect of yourself through a dialogue where you're literally speaking to that part of yourself and you're saying, hey, I see that you're afraid. I hear you. I'm going to take full responsibility for you from this day forward. Now, that's a pretty powerful one because up until that point, this aspect has felt abandoned by you. Not that you intentionally did it, but that's what the feeling is. That's why you're triggered. I accept you as you are. I promise to keep you safe and I love you. And then usually there's an invitation to come home. And I usually will have the client say all of this out loud. That way it's much more powerful. And as you invite this aspect of you to come home, you wait for a response. And, more often than not, obviously the response is, yes, I want to come back home. But let's say hypothetically, this, aspect of you is like, oh, I'm not feeling like I trust you yet. Then more of a dialogue is needed to really understand what is this aspect needing from you? Do they believe that the commitment you've just given to keep them safe and to take full responsibility that you're capable of doing that? And if not, you may need to have more of a dialogue. And so that would be the heal phase. And then the integration phase is once the healing is done, we now need to literally bring them back home to home base within us. And so we try to create some sort of physical contact between, higher self and this aspect that you've just healed. And this is all happening, with your higher mind and visualizing. But we're pulling the content from the subconscious. So as we're doing this, you're already in a very relaxed state because I've walked you through it. Um, and so now you're giving some form of physical affection. It usually ends with a hug. Like you are literally wrapping your arms around this part of yourself, saying, "Yes, I love you. Please come home." And then you match eye contact, letting them know they're seen. You're speaking to them, so you're hearing them, and then you're matching your breath, reminding them that you too are about to become one again. And so then the integration happens. And once the client, visually sees that the two are no longer separate, they're now one, they've come back home. And then the final phase is to relate. And this is where it's exciting and a little, scary because who are you now that this part of you has been integrated? You don't know yet. And so it's all about going out and dating yourself. Who are you? What are the things that you like? Other people around you may notice something is different. I had a recent client who said, Jeannine, I just went from questioning everything to knowing after
Mm.
that session. And that was huge. And it still gives me goosebumps when I say it because that's it. There's no longer this question of, am I doing it right? What's the right decision? And that was that for her, that was her thing. And now she knows. that was the relate piece after she did all that work to explore, discover, heal, and integrate. And so these things take time. And really, what this whole process is about is establishing an amazing relationship with yourself, first and foremost, so that when you attract other relationships, they're more in alignment with who you are now. And you're less likely to go through those repetitive patterns that may be dysfunctional relationships, which I've had. Whatever it is, the better relationship you are with yourself, the better the decisions you're going to make for yourself and the quality of people that you attract into your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why I have, the first L is love yourself because it ripples out into everything else, like you just described, your relationships and then the quality of your life too. I'm also curious to know the part when you were saying, um, that you make eye contact. Is this now I know that, you would walk a client through this, so you are holding eye contact. Is this whole process possible for somebody to do just with themselves, like in the mirror? Like, can you dialogue with yourself in the mirror and then, give yourself a hug and then relate, looking eye contact with yourself in the mirror? Like, is this something that needs to be done with another person, or can this be done independently?
You can do this independently. When I was referring to eye contact, that means while you're doing that visualization of observing yourself from that higher self or higher mind, being able to look into the eyes of that aspect. So your higher self is looking into the eyes of essentially yourself,
Ah, got it.
but it's
Okay.
the part that's disconnected. However, what you've just referenced is also a really great way of doing it. So I just had an experience where I donated over 50% of my belongings and to live a nomadic lifestyle. And as I was, finishing up and I had all of these, containers in my front room before I was heading out, I looked in the mirror and I was like, wow, you're doing it. You're living your dream. This is amazing. And then I kid you not, about an hour later, there was a part of me that was losing it. Like, what am I doing? And obviously, I was scared. And
Mm.
so I did the same thing. I went back to the mirror and I was like, all right, so you're scared. That's normal. This is a big step. Not everybody does this. It's completely unknown. But hey, look at what you've been through in your life. Is anything really going to be as bad as it was? It's not. And what's the worst that's going to happen? You decide that maybe that lifestyle is not for you. Well, now you know, right? So there's a lot of power in the ability to see yourself, and the mirror is a great way to do that.
Yeah, and it sounds like you were practicing self-soothing in the moment of, having a response, a reaction internally,
Yeah.
which is really powerful too, because I think a lot of times we can kind of feel like we're out of control. Like if you're in a situation where you're triggered, all of a sudden it's like, at least for me, it's like I kind of can go external and want something or someone to help me feel better.
Mhm.
However, when we can utilize tools that almost, I hesitate to use the word control, but like have some sense that it's within our power to come back down, and be grounded and kind of restore, um, the level of balance and peace internally. It can be really helpful. And I'm thinking about, tumultuous relationships or a breakup. Like, let's say somebody leaves you,
Mhm.
you feel very out of control because they made the decision and they're abandoning you, essentially, right?
Yeah.
And so this process that you're walking us through, you you can use it in so many different ways.
Mhm.
And so I'm just thinking like, okay, end of a relationship, you feel like you're losing it, you feel out of control. You can walk yourself through this process to kind of bring yourself back to your own power. But then I also heard you give the example of like life transitions, right? It's like, okay, you
Mhm.
decide that. I mean, first of all, congratulations. That is a huge,
Thank you.
exciting decision of becoming a nomad. It's something I've always wanted to do. And it sounds, exciting, but also scary at the same
Right.
time. So these life transitions, they come with so much uncertainty and a relationship, career change, moving, giving up a certain lifestyle that you had for a different one.
Right.
Um, is there Yeah, I would love for you to kind of, if you want to share anything about either your story and how that has helped you help other people, because I think there's so much value in experiential learning. I mean, obviously we want to learn from other experts and science and proven strategies, but then there's also so much value for someone who has lived experience. So, has that played a huge role in how you help people?
Absolutely. Probably the biggest feedback I get is the fact that I've had so many experiences and that it makes me more relatable.
Mm-hmm.
So when somebody comes in, no matter what they have shared, so far there hasn't been anything that I have heard that is more than I can handle hearing. Now I really attribute that to the fact that I had many literally horrific experiences. And because of that, it has set the bar in a different, way so that, if somebody says something, regardless of what it is, I'm just hearing it. I'm like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. I'm not being traumatized by it, but it also allows me to now share just how powerful each of us really are. So you used the word control, and in these cases, I think that's actually the right word because what we are trying to do is we are trying to control our own mind, and our mind has become out of balance whenever we've had trauma. And so it's all about the journey of bringing it back to balance. Once we recognize that the mind is so powerful, obviously, I mean, you could be totally outside, in nature, everything's fine, and all of a sudden you smell lavender or the grass, and your time warped into wherever that trauma was that reminded you of that smell.
Mm-hmm.
How powerful is that? Now, if the mind is powerful enough to do that, imagine what it can do on the flip side. So if we can remember that our mind is incredibly powerful, it is up to us to train it so that we are in control of our mind. The mind is not in control of us.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're in a triggered state, we feel out of control. We are definitely looking for somebody, please help me because I feel like I can't handle life right now. So if there's somebody around you that's willing to give you a hug or be brave enough to ask for a hug, there's something really powerful in that. Just knowing that, oh, somebody else has me for that moment. And lots of times that can bring a person back to a more present state. In my life experiences, because the majority of my trauma was pretty much from birth to 25 years old, which was when I left my first marriage. And, I was 15 when I met him, and he was 32. Now, you just take those numbers right there, and that's textbook daddy issues,
Mm-hmm.
obviously. But I'm a child. I've got mother trauma and I've got father trauma. Now, if the only thing I know is trauma and I'm looking to be loved, whether it was a man or a woman, the first person that said, I love you, that was exactly what I was going to go toward. And that person ended up being just like my parents, addicted to meth, all of the very similar types of abuse, because that's all I knew. Now, ironically, I had run away from home at that point and learned how to live homeless for 18 months. So I left home trying to find the opposite of what was happening at home.
Mm-hmm.
But everything in my subconscious, all it knew was dysfunction. So what did I attract? That exact same thing, even though my conscious intention was to not go into that. And so then I had, two children from him, and now the trauma trickled down. My children experienced very similar types of trauma because of their dad.
Mm-hmm.
So then there was that. That's a hard blow, especially when, I was trying to create something different for myself. And now I felt like I was in even deeper. And all I could think of was, I don't want my children's children, since I couldn't stop what happened with them. I don't want my children's children, my future grandchildren, to have to go through this. So that's when I started asking the questions. How did I get in this situation to begin with? And I would encourage everyone, start asking questions and looking at what are your patterns. So, that was at 25 was when I left him. I'm now 47. Now, I've had multiple relationships since then. And at some point, I had to look at, okay, who's the common denominator here? I am. So I could sit and point the finger all day long. I could say, oh, I'm this way because my mom and dad this, my ex-partner is that. But you know what? That's giving away all of my power. So again, I'm taking full responsibility for myself. What parts of me are attracting this into my life?
Mhm.
Because when it keeps happening, you've got to look at, well, who's the common denominator? And that's where you actually regain your power because you're like, well, if the common denominator is me, then all I have to do is figure out, well, what is it? Right.
Mhm.
And that's where I was starting to realize the unfolding of joy in my life because I was like, all right, there are all these aspects of me who have been disassociated, disconnected, and they're all trying to find love in all the wrong places. Right. Because as a kid, the foundation of the mother principle and the father principle were just dysfunction. And everybody wants to be loved. So that means aspects of my inner child, even in an adult body, are saying, please love me. Oh, I'll accept this about you, even if it's abusive or whatever. Just love me, right? And that's how we end up getting into these situations is we don't understand our own value, we don't understand our own boundaries, and we make excuses for other people. Instead of holding people accountable, first yourself, and then, the people that you attract into your life. So coming back to your question as far as how I help people, there are some things that are just universal. And you know this to be true in your profession. We have to love ourselves. We have to be willing to really look deeply at every aspect of ourselves, even the parts we don't want to look at, which is going to take great courage, great commitment, and lots of vulnerability, right? If we are in a state of, oh, I just don't want to feel, oh, it's too painful, your strength is in your ability to let go and cry and be vulnerable. That's really where the strength is. I don't want to use the term weakness, but I'm going to say the opposite of strength is to believe that showing emotion is somehow not going to help you. Because the reality is when we've had an experience that is more than we can handle, we have to express. It has to come out somehow.
Mhm.
Now, it may be showing up as anger, the secondary emotion. So behind anger is sadness or fear. When we can really see that we are sad or we are afraid, that's really where we're now really seeing ourselves. So I'd recently in October, I went through a breakup. I believed I was in a monogamous relationship and come to find out I was not.
Mm.
And so that was quite a blow because I had committed almost 2 years with this person. But something happened because the way I discovered it was literally he had left his phone open on the counter and it was the communication with this person. And so I couldn't unsee what I saw, right? There was no way that I could even like create illusion
Mm.
to give an excuse for this person. I was like, wow, there's just there's no hiding this. And once trust has been broken, there is no relationship. Now, a lot of people, you could deal with it in many different ways. You could work on building the trust. You could leave. Because of everything that I've been through, I realized in that moment, I was like, I am not willing to go any further with this person. Knowing that they knew my history, but also knowing that what somebody else does, that's really not a reflection of me. It's a reflection of that person.
Mhm.
Yes, it was incredibly painful. The mourning process was very intense. However, I also knew, Jeannine, you're going to get through this. This is absolutely not the worst thing you've been through, and be glad you saw it now, not 10 years from now. And look at you deciding that you're not going to put up with this. Whereas in the past, I would have let this go on. I would have made excuses, right? And knowing and feeling insecure the whole time. And instead, I remember the verbiage I used when I decided to confront the situation. And I did not think about it ahead of time. Um, and I swore a little bit. So I said, I'm a mother effing queen and the seat next to me is for a king, and your behavior is that of a player F boy. And
Mhm.
that's not going to work for me. And something happened because all of a sudden, when I said it, it was like I stepped into what I would say my queendom. And I realized, no, I value myself more than to continue with this person. And at the same time, lovingly let them go because clearly they have things that they need to work out. So I didn't have the normal resentment that I think I would have had in the past. It was more of an acceptance. I could see the wounding of this person's past that led them to the actions and decisions that they made, which has everything to do with their past and really nothing to do with me. And in that way, I could lovingly say, I'm going to have to let you go, knowing that I still love you. And what I was also doing was I was really loving myself, but I
Mhm.
had to go through that pain. I had to go through that mourning process. So I just wanted to circle back around since that's, the relationship
Yeah, oh
thing
my
that you asked.
gosh. I really appreciate you sharing that story. It is comprised of so many different elements that, also the tools that you teach other people and that you've learned along the way that you then had to use for yourself. And something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, especially, is even when people are, experts in a certain field, right? Or you've learned so much over your life, it doesn't mean that it's any easier, quote unquote, to
Yeah,
like move through challenging transitions and things that happen in life. So you were able to notice and observe your progress of like, wow, I would have handled this probably really differently earlier in my life than I was able to do now. But as you said, you still had to allow yourself tons of grieving space, processing through what happened. And so you're using all the tools and the skills, and that's for all humans. Like it doesn't matter like how
absolutely.
much of an expert anyone is, we still all have to practice the same things. And one thing that I thought was interesting that you were talking about, and this was like a little bit back, was that we have these different parts of us that are kind of showing up with different wounds and different needs. And so when if you let's say you're in a relationship, as you were saying, where maybe you're not being treated the way you should be, or it's less than your hope for yourself. It's almost like if your kind of wound is that, like you said, that you were looking for something else, but ultimately you ended up attracting what you were used to from your
Right.
past, right? You could because you wanted to be loved. So this is where my brain is going. So you were saying, okay, I wanted to be loved, and so somebody came along,
Mhm.
gave you maybe a little bit of that,
Yep.
or a form of that, and so in my head, I was thinking, oh, that's because our brain likes to focus on evidence of like that reinforces our belief, right? So if
Absolutely.
like I want to be loved, so I'm going to look for all of the evidence that this person gives me that they love me and they care about me, and I'm just going to like sweep all the rest under the rug and deal with it.
Yes. And I would say people will show you who they are, but you have to be willing to see it.
Hmm.
So whether you're going into a relationship, coming out of a relationship, take a step back and just observe. Actions definitely speak louder than words. And if you don't try to change the person, because that doesn't work, they have to want to change on their own. But taking a step back and just observing, people will actually show you who they are and that they've been that the entire time.
Mm-hmm.
We have either been projecting onto them to be something else, but once we can come to that, clear vision, we see, wait a minute, nope, that's what they were showing me the whole time.
Hmm.
And in that way, you can accept it a little, hopefully you'll accept it a little bit better, maybe after the anger part of the grief stage.
And that brings us to kind of the end of your story that you shared with us is like that's where you were. Because you were able to step into such an embodied version of I love myself and I care about myself, it enabled you to see the reality of your partner
Yeah,
versus like the blinded, the visor that we can sometimes wear.
Yeah.
I call it like the invisible glass.
Yeah.
Um, and so I always also like to think something that's helped me a lot is thinking about, and it kind of is a different way of phrasing what you said, is like everyone is always doing the best that they can possibly do with the experiences that they've had and the knowledge that they have so far in life. Now, their best might suck, but
Okay.
it's the best that they're doing with where
Yeah.
they're at, right? And so
Yeah.
we can also think about that for ourselves too. I mean, there's a lot of times where we might make choices or deal with situations in a way that we might feel really disappointed in ourselves or might even feel judgmental or self-critical. But in that moment, we did the best that we could with where we were at. It's like I think of it almost as like a journey timeline oftentimes. And if if your ex is over here, like this is the toolkit that you have right now. You will eventually make it further on that path, and then you'll have a different toolkit or maybe added more to your toolkit.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like you've acquired so many of these kind of tools and strategies from the experiences in your life and also probably from working with other people and their stories, I would imagine.
Yes, absolutely. I think what we end up telling ourselves or our expectations of ourselves oftentimes can be very unreasonable. So the moment I catch myself in judgment, and usually you can tell by the verbiage of your own thoughts,
Mhm.
oh, you shouldn't have done that. Oh, there you go again, Jeannine. Or, whatever it shows up for you. That's an opportunity again. That's a little nugget that's waiting to be explored. Because somewhere within myself, there's a belief that I should be something different than what I'm showing up as in that moment. I used to be really hard on myself about having multiple marriages or multiple relationships. But then it wasn't actually me who came to this. Um, so the gentleman that I'm currently dating, he said, look at everything that you've been through. How are you to know any different? Of course, you're going to make mistakes along the way, but you're going each relationship that you told me about seems to have gotten better, and
Mhm.
that's true. So if I look at, here's what I understood growing up, and here's the progression of my understanding of healthy relationships when I had absolutely no blueprint for a healthy relationship, then yeah, wow, the progress is amazing, which
Mhm.
helped me reframe because for the longest time there was shame. Oh, here's another divorce, or oh, here's another breakup. No, I'm still figuring it out,
Mhm.
and there's nothing wrong with that.
Mhm.
There's no set of right or wrong way. It's just here's my path and here's where it's taking me and here's what I'm learning along the way. And if we look at our each of our paths is uniquely different and it's an exploration. We're all trying to figure it out.
Mhm.
There's what we've been told growing up or through our belief systems of what it should look like. But then there's what works for you, you know? So question everything because lots of times our beliefs are what's holding us back.
Yes. Yes. And I love kind of always making sure that we address, as far as, how can we best L3 is also looking at what prevents us from being able to love ourselves, love our relationships, and love our lives. And so, yeah, these limiting beliefs are for sure things that can hold us back. But if we have the toolkit to be able to expose them and kind of understand them, and also see our progress. I mean, that is just so huge to be able to acknowledge, from where you started and to where you are now. Hopefully,
Yep.
you've made a lot of progress along the way.
Yeah.
So what would you say you want kind of your before you share with us how people can kind of get in touch with you and work with you and read your books, what would you like to leave people with as kind of parting words or something to kind of reflect on for the rest of the day regarding how they can best, start to love them and accept themselves, as that is the first ripple.
Right. Well, I would say at the end of the day and at the end of this life, who are you living with the most? Yourself. So you are the priority. Remember to make yourself the priority, no matter what, whether you have kids, don't have kids, responsibilities, you are number one because everything begins from that place. And two, believe in yourself.
Mhm.
No matter what your experiences are, where you are in life, you can only begin this journey from where you're at. When you have faith in yourself, anything's possible.
Very true. Very well said. Um, Jeannine, if people want to grab that, I think you said it's a free gift, right? That people
Yes.
can have the triggered pocket guide, do you think you called
Yes.
it? Okay, great. Where can they find that?
So you can find it at goodbyetension.com. There's a page called Abundance Beyond Trauma, which is the name of my book, and you can find the link to my book there as well as the workbook. But then there's a place for you to put in your email address so that I can send you the free I'm Triggered Pocket Guide, which is in digital form. That way, I mean, 99.9% of us have smartphones. So that way you can save it on your smartphone. That way you always have it available. Or you can print it out if you need it, put it on the fridge, etc.
Awesome. And then that way it's easy to pull up if you're triggered, you can be like, oh, what are those 3 steps I'm supposed to do again? If you can't
Right.
remember on your own, you just look at your phone and
That's
your phone
right.
will tell you.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And do you have social media? Should people follow you?
Yes. So you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, and YouTube, either at Goodbye Tension or under my name, Jeannine Rashidi or Jeannine L. Rashidi.
Awesome. Well, you sound like a
Yeah.
busy woman about all these all these different handles and work. Well, Jeannine, thank you so much for coming and sharing not only some of your personal stories and journey with us today, but also the tools you've learned along the way. Super, super helpful, kind of step-by-step things that we can do to learn how to really come into self-understanding, self-acceptance, and essentially creating a better life and relationships for ourselves by starting with number one. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Emmy.
Awesome. Okay, for everybody who's watching, it is my pleasure to believe in you and the gifts that you bring to the world. Please make sure that you subscribe to the channel and like and share with anybody you think would benefit, and we'll see you in the next video.